tend to forget that all that does is to create awareness. The people have had no chance to ask questions, to try out the organization, its products, policies. And so if you think of your own life, the really important relationships in your life don't just sort of happen on a weekend. You know, you take time, even with your own family, with your own kids or relatives. It takes time. And besides which, the one thing that I think the history of public relations also makes clear is that it isn't just, as they say in the military, winning the battle. It's winning the war. And if 10 years from now, or even a year from now, your great victory of a year ago has turned to ashes and they're all angry, I mean, that was just a waste of resources, a missed opportunity.
Could you expand on that a little bit, what your philosophy is?
Well, every practice, every profession, every organization we know exists only by public consent. It's my belief that the public has consented to allow the public relations body of knowledge and public relations professionals into society on the premise that we serve an overriding social benefit. And I think that social benefit is that if you're going to have a society where the people are going to have a voice in decisions that affect their lives, if we're going to be a democracy, in other words, that you need then a true profession which has the assignment of bringing people in touch with organizations and ideas and leaders in a way that they can impact them, so that people really can go into these decisions with a base of knowledge, a base of some understanding. And so I believe that the public relations practitioner is really the practical applier, if you will, of Jeffersonian theory. And that if we weren't here, you'd have to invent somebody to do that, because how can a person have any knowledge of what's happening in their local school, their local hospital, the organizations that produce the products they buy, the public and private organizations that impact society, unless there's a person inside those organizations that is doing two things. One, trying to give them information, and second, trying to give them access. In other words, to listen to what they're thinking and to try and bring out that harmonious relationship between them. And so I think that this positions public relations, if you will, in society as something that we who are in the field should be extremely proud of. But we have to remember that that's what gives us our consent. And if we go too far just counseling our clients and pushing our clients' agendas, then we're not being totally professional. As far as not using the term public relations so much as public relationships, I think this is just a simple dictionary problem, definition problem that we have in our field. The term public relations is really analogous to nursing, law, engineering. It's a type of practice. It's a vocation, a profession. It's a body of knowledge. It's the process. See, and so we say, oh, that organization has good public relations. Well, I guess that means they have a good process. The outcome of good public relations process ought to be good public relationships. And so you'll hear me and my colleagues talk about relationships. That's what we're after.
Pat, you mentioned learning something about the business side. Now, this leads to another question. Nowadays, when we talk about educating young people to enter the public relations field, we usually say that they have to develop some business sense.
Absolutely.
And we also advise them to go to a school of management or to take some management course. Now, you're nodding, so you're in agreement that this should be a part of the background, the training of a public relations person.
Well, as you know, I have had the fun of serving on a number of curriculum development committees for, in fact, for about a dozen universities in the United States and Canada. And the one that I really like the best is one that a group of us developed for a university in Michigan, Ferris State, where public relations is actually taught in the business school. And it's one of the rare instances of that. The persons teaching it are accredited members of PRSA. It's not that they've gone in another direction. But these students have to take marketing, finance, organizational structure, organizational behavior, as well as the communication piece, naturally the good basic humanities education, and a good deal of behavioral science. And I think that's what we're talking about. That's why I'm not sure we can do it anymore in an undergraduate term.
Is that the pattern of the future? What I see is, you know, we talked earlier about the media, and you haven't yet commented yet whether you feel having a media background is still highly desirable for a public relations person, but you're certainly saying more management skills and attitudes are needed.
I think the entire history of mankind, to say nothing of the recent history of organizations, tells us that people who think globally and are strategic in their thinking, they become the leaders, the managers. People who have a specific skill, even if it's an important skill like writing, they become technicians. And obviously, the place public relations can make the greatest impact on society and organizations is at the strategic level, to get this philosophy of democracy, relationships, and so forth inculcated into organizations. And so I think we have to go in that direction.
Where do PR practitioners get this philosophy, get these values that you're reflecting here? I mean, examine your own past and ask, you know, what made you what you were when you were 16? Where did those values come from? Is there a certain desirable family background? Can you say maybe there are certain personality types that will do better or worse in public relations? Now that's a big subject.
Yeah, those are two very interesting questions. As to the personality types, you know, we always talk about PR people being gregarious and outgoing. Well,
right, extroverts.
Yeah, there's never been a lot of research on that, but I've done a little research of my own, and at the PRSA Institute in 1981, we did some formal research. In every case, public relations people describe themselves as absolute loners once the business day was over, because they're so tied up with people all day long that once they don't have to work anymore, they want to go off in a corner. So we better rethink our definition of gregarious people. They have to be able to be good interpersonal relators, obviously. But as to the first question, I have a hunch that if you come from a family, obviously, that's active in the community, maybe active in politics, that certainly helps. It doesn't hurt any if you have some kind of a religious or cultural background that teaches you interdependence as opposed to a more selfish independence. It's just whatever in your family would get you to see this bigger picture. But I think it's more than that, too. I think it helps to have enough ego that you don't want to be a little cog. And if you want to be a bigger cog, you start thinking about, hey, how does this system really run? And where could I have maximum input and impact in the system? And so if you start looking at that, you can see that it's strategic. It's getting organizations really to mesh with their publics. So that's where the most fun and the most action is.
You mentioned some other personality type terms. Self-esteem, high self-esteem, is that important when you work in PR?
Well, it's interesting. You've got to have such high self-esteem that you don't need a lot of ego titillation. And the reason for that is that the public relations counselor, and I think this is probably true of people in other echelons of just offering public relations services and processes, are rarely going to get praise, even if they deserve it. I mean, in our work, for example, we are always discussing our role as catalysts. We're counselors. We meet with the managers of an institution, and we try and steer them in a direction. And very often, we can't even do the work of going in that direction, because, of course, psychologically, having gotten to make the decision, we probably need to bring somebody else in to do that specific work, so we can keep counseling them and be objective about the whole thing. So the job is done, and it's been a great success. They praise if anybody, their own people, and the counselor said, gee, thanks, you know, that was nice. And so we always, as you know, I do a lot of training for practitioners in counseling skills, because I think that's an area we've just not even begun to get into enough. And the first thing I always tell them is, if you really need a lot of ego gratification, get out of public relations. If you need the CEO to say you did a great job, the CEO is too busy, and if you did your job right, the CEO may not even realize it was your idea. The CEO thinks it was his or her idea.
Pat, you mentioned one aspect of the usual definition of public relations, which is that it at least involves two-way communications. Sometimes it's said, however, that when an organization listens to others, gets feedback from others, that it's primarily in order to develop better strategies in order to persuade those publics. Now, I gather you feel that it's a little bit more, not just a little bit, maybe a lot more than that. And my question then is, to what extent do you see an organization responding to what it hears and changing its policies or changing its behavior?
Well, I think there's no doubt, as you know, the book that I'm currently working on is a new edition of our case studies book. There's no doubt, if you review the cases and just review the history of public relations, that the only long-term strategy for any organization is to become so close to their key publics that in fact it's a co-authorship, that those key publics are helping to shape the organization's policies and products and stands on issues, because otherwise you're not in a harmonious relationship at all. You're in a confrontational relationship. Now, I think what's misunderstood here is that when we say that, a lot of people figure that they should just pander to the key publics. Well, clearly those publics don't know as much. If you're talking about education, for example, the publics out there can't possibly know as much about education as the teachers and the superintendents and the principals and the experts in that field. So there is also an advocacy role here. You might call it an educational role. And that's what I was saying earlier, that we really have this responsibility to see that the key publics we have to work with have enough understanding so that they can participate in the decisions. But any organization that doesn't make those decisions participatively and jointly is just asking for trouble, and I believe the record proves it.
Pat, you mentioned another magic term here, harmonious relationships. And it used to be said in a lot of definitions that the purpose of public relations was to develop goodwill and also to create understanding, and the whole emphasis seemed to be let's be in harmony with others. Now, do you see any room for conflict? Is this sometimes desirable, at least at some stage, if there is conflict, or do you always seek harmony?
Well, I think you're seeking harmony. Harmony or consensus or co-authorship is the outcome that you seek, but sometimes you're going to seek this over a very long time span, because organizations and key publics, or perhaps opposition or competitors, start out, of course, from two different places. And so I think there's always in a human society going to be plenty of room for conflict, and certainly one of the skills that we in public relations have to master, not only for ourselves but primarily to help our clients, who usually are not very good at it, is conflict management. However, in saying that, I also believe that harmony by itself may not do anything. People may agree with you, they may like your organization, but I believe in what we call behavioral public relations, that our role really is to so totally integrate the organization's policies and ideas and products with the key publics and make such co-authored decisions that in fact we can give each other mutually supportive behaviors. And to me, the harmony, the education, that's just the process. It's critical, you have to have a process, but the outcome is those behaviors. In other words, I don't give a hoot whether people love my clients. All I want to know is, are they buying their products, supporting them on issues, coming there to work, joining with them in community betterment, showing, in other words, by behavior, that there really is this harmony.
what do you see as the boundaries of public relations? You know, we've alluded to that earlier. Where do we overlap with or even invade the realm of management or human resources management or financial management?
Well, you know, we believe in our firm, and I believe that we have thought far too narrowly about the field, because you can't believe all the things I've already expressed, the ability to help society, the ability to bring co-authorship. You can't do that in the narrow confines. So we say public relations, which is really public relationships, means a practitioner ought to be able to deal with any relationship which is acted out in a public setting. And so that means not only do we deal with larger groups, but we also have to be able to deal with one-on-ones. And I don't care whether it's your CEO talking to a senator or whether it's two vice presidents that are arguing and holding the organization up for making progress. We need those intervention skills to get in and deal with those relationships just the same as we can go out and educate and listen to and co-author programs with maybe very large groups of customers or stockholders or employees. And so I believe that classic public relations, public affairs is certainly a part of it, and certainly there's a communications piece that you can separate out from that if you want to. I don't do that, but if people want to do that. I think we have to be very heavily into this field called OD, organization development, which teaches us these managerial skills, conflict management, and making interventions, and all of those things. And I believe strongly that we need to really be involved in human resources, particularly the human resources development side, teamwork, motivation, morale, productivity, because we have those skills. This is the same body of knowledge. Now, does that mean we ought to go have a shootout with the HR people? Well, not particularly, but we certainly ought to have a kind of a merging, and I believe that's what's going to happen. I think you're going to see more and more that the technicians in human resources, the personnel people, the ones who do vacation policies and Blue Cross and benefits, are going to maybe be put here, and that the public relations and the real human resources development people are going to become one department. You know, Karen King, the late Karen King, of course, who was president of PRSA preceding me, and who in his day was the highest placed and the highest paid practitioner in America, had an interesting title. He was senior vice president of Texaco for public relations and human resources. And he was pretty conservative, you remember. He got a lot less conservative after a lot of us worked on him, but he always said, you know, how do you separate these two? What we say is that there are three arenas of practice. There's mission support, that may be sales support for some organizations, it may be whatever the organization's goal is. That's our traditional old area where we do publicity, awareness, promotion, marketing, all of those things. But that's really a small piece of it, because among other things, other people can do that. But then there's two other arenas, and the next one is public policy. Now, public policy today can quickly rule mission support. AT&T found that out in 1984. They did a good job of mission support, but they didn't manage public policy, and suddenly they didn't exist anymore. And then there's this third arena of organizational effectiveness, which includes employees, the community, stockholders, alumni if it's a college, parents if it's a school, the family, if you will. Well, that's really where the human resources people have concentrated, except that in many organizations, all the relationships and communities